हेलो स्टूडेंट्स, आप सभी का हमारे चैनल विद्या क्लास 10th में स्वागत है। स्टूडेंट्स, इस वीडियो में हम देखेंगे क्लास 10th इंग्लिश में फुटप्रिंट्स विथ फीट्स का चैप्टर फर्स्ट और ट्रायम्फ ऑफ सर्जरी। स्टूडेंट्स, इस वीडियो में हम देखेंगे इस चैप्टर के एनसीईआरटी क्वेश्चन आंसर्स, कुछ एक्स्ट्रा क्वेश्चन आंसर्स और इस चैप्टर से हमें क्या मैसेज मिलता है, और इस वीडियो में हम इस चैप्टर की समरी भी कवर करेंगे। तो स्टूडेंट्स, इस वीडियो को एंड तक ज़रूर देखें और मैं हर पेज को रीड करने के बाद उस पेज को लैंडस्केप में करूँगा, जिसकी वजह से आप उस पेज का स्क्रीनशॉट ले सकोगे और उसका प्रिंट आउट भी निकलवा सकते हो स्टूडेंट्स। तो चलिए स्टूडेंट्स, स्टार्ट करते हैं हमारा ये वीडियो। फर्स्ट स्टूडेंट्स, हम इंट्रोडक्शन से स्टार्ट करते हैं इस चैप्टर का। A Triumph of Surgery is an interesting story by James Herriot. It is based on an episode which reflects the silly and sentimental behavior of a rich woman towards her pet dog named Tricky. She pampers and overfeeds her dog. As a consequence, the dog falls seriously ill and has to be sent to a veterinary surgeon. The story tells us how the dog is cured without an operation. The whole narrative is full of fun and humor. Next, students' theme. The Triumph of Surgery is the story of Tricky, an over-pampered and overfed dog. His mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, dotes him and feeds him all the unhealthy food he likes. Due to this, he becomes fat like a bloated sausage and lethargic. She thinks he is sick and seeks help from the narrator, a veterinary doctor. He knows that what is exactly wrong with Tricky and cures him with exercise and healthy diet. The story focuses on how an excess of everything is bad and how over-pampering can lead to disaster. Though presented in a light and humorous way, the story brings to light some people ignorant of a healthy way to groom their pets, spoil their health. Some people treat their children in the same manner and regret it later. अब स्टूडेंट, इस पेज को मैं लैंडस्केप में करूँगा जिससे आप इस पेज का स्क्रीनशॉट ले सकते हो। इस वीडियो को पॉज करके स्टूडेंट्स आप इस पेज का स्क्रीनशॉट ले सकते हो। अब हम नेक्स्ट पार्ट पर मूव करते हैं। नेक्स्ट है स्टूडेंट्स इसका टाइटल। द टाइटल ऑफ द स्टोरी, द ट्रायम्फ ऑफ सर्जरी, इज आयरॉनिक एंड अप्लाई suited to the situation where Tricky, a greedy dog, falls sick because of being over-pampered and overfed. As a result, Tricky becomes fat and lazy. Mrs. Pumphrey seeks medical help as she does not realize that Tricky's state was her own doing. She is frantic and she thinks something is drastically wrong with Tricky. In spite of repeated warnings by the narrator, she had failed to give a healthy grooming to Tricky. She does not realize that pets need a disciplined lifestyle like human. When Tricky recovers under the narrator's watchful eyes, she thinks it is a triumph of surgery. Ironically, the doctor has used no medicine or surgery to cure the dog. The lady's remark amuses us. अब स्टूडेंट, इस चैप्टर के हम क्वेश्चन आंसर्स देख लेते हैं। ये सारे क्वेश्चन आंसर्स बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है स्टूडेंट्स। सो फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज, व्हाई इज मिसिस पम्फ्री वरीड अबाउट ट्रिकी? मिसिस पम्फ्री इज वरीड अबाउट ट्रिकी बिकॉज ही इज अनवेल. ही हैज़ रिफ्यूज्ड टू ईट फूड एंड हैड bouts of vomiting. She feels that he is suffering from a serious health issue as he becomes listless and seems to have no energy. Next question is, what does she do to help him? Is she wise in this? Mrs. Pumphrey starts giving him extra snacks like malt, cod liver oil, and Horlicks. Apart from his main meals to improve his conditions, she also continues to satisfy his sweet tooth with cream cakes and chocolates. She does not give him any exercise, considering his listlessness as well. She is not wise in doing so because overfeeding Tricky is worsening his conditions instead of improving it. It has made him very fat and lazy. Question number 3 is, who does I refer to in this story? So I refers to narrator, Mrs. James Herriot, a veterinary doctor. Question number 4 is the narrator as rich as Tricky's mistress? So the answer is no. The narrator is not as rich as Tricky's mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. We can say so because the narrator seems fascinated by how lavishly. स्टूडेंट्स, आप पहले इसका पेज का स्क्रीनशॉट ले लीजिए। How lavishly Mrs. Pumphrey spends on the well-being and maintenance of her pet. He is Unusually surprised by the enriching items she sends for Tricky, as he cannot afford them for himself. Next, question number 5. How does he treat the dog? So answer is James Harriet treats Tricky just like he would treat an overweight and lazy dog, which Tricky is. He cuts down his food intake and keeps him under strict observations for the initial days at hospital. He gradually increases Tricky's food and sets him free for physical activities to improve his health. Question number 6. Why is he tempted to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest? Mr. Harriet is tempted to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest because of the good food and when he is enjoying in Tricky's name. He does not want to lose the luxurious inflow of fresh eggs, wine, and brandy. Question number 7. Why does Mrs. Pumphrey think the dog's recovery is a triumph of surgery? Mrs. Pumphrey thinks that Tricky's recovery is a triumph of surgery because his illness was very serious. She was of the opinion that there were very few chances of Tricky to improve and he needed immediate medical attention. Thus, he revised without any medicinal treatment was a great achievement according to her. Question number 8. What kind of a person do you think the narrator or a veterinary surgeon is? Would you say he is a tactful as well as full of common sense? So the answer is the narrator, a veterinary surgeon, is a capable and wise doctor. He handles Tricky properly, which shows that he is sincere about his profession. He does not operate upon the dog unnecessarily and cures him by altering his diet and activities. He is a tactful person as he knew exactly how to convince Mrs. Pumphrey to hospitalize Tricky for a surgery. His decision to inform Mrs. Pumphrey to collect Tricky supports his sensibilities even though he was tempted to keep Tricky as a permanent guest. Question number 9. Do you think Tricky was happy to go home? What do you think will happen now? Tricky was happy to go back home as he really loved his mistress and the comfort of his lavish life. He didn't have any friends at home like in the hospital, but he seemed equally excited at the sight of Mrs. Pumphrey. I think that Mrs. Pumphrey will now be careful about Tricky's diet and health. She may also give him exercise daily as prescribed by the vet earlier. Question number 10. Do you think it is a real life episode or mere fiction, or is it a mixture of both? So the answer is the story seems to be a mixture of both. It may be possible for a rich person to overfeed their pets due to love. It is not unusual for them to maintain a vast wardrobe for them either. But it is unlikely for a veterinary doctor to go out of the way and lie in order to save an animal. It is also unusual for anyone to consume food which is given in the name of a pet's health. Question number 11. Do you think there are also parents like Mrs. Pumphrey? So the answer is yes. There are some parents like Mrs. Pumphrey who spoil their children by pampering them. They overfeed their children, pets, despite being aware of the harmful effects on their health. Parents like Mrs. Pumphrey should maintain a healthy lifestyle of their family and pets. Question number 12. What would you have done if you were in the narrator's place? So the answer is, if I were in the narrator's place, I would have treated Tricky with a similar amount of compassion and love. I would have been equally caring as Mr. James Harriet towards Tricky. I would have just been a little more stern while advising Mrs. Pumphrey to put Tricky on a strict diet, knowing her way of showing love. I would have also not consumed Tricky's share of eggs, wine, and brandy by Mrs. Pumphrey. Question number 13. This episode describes the silly behavior of a rich woman who is foolishly indulgent, perhaps because she is lonely. Do you think such people are merely silly or can their actions cause harm to others? So the answer is Mrs. Pumphrey's action had a harmful reaction on Tricky's health. She was overparenting and overfeeding Tricky in the name of love. This worsened his condition to an extent that he had to be hospitalized. People like Mrs. Pumphrey are not just merely silly, but their actions can definitely have dangerous consequences for others. तो स्टूडेंट्स, हमारा ये वीडियो यहीं पर ख़त्म होता है. स्टूडेंट्स, आप सभी के पेजेस के स्क्रीनशॉट ले सकते हैं. और स्टूडेंट्स, ये चैप्टर आप फुल रिवाइज़ करना स्टूडेंट, और इसका आप एग्ज़ाम में अच्छे से स्कोर कर सकते हो. इसके अंदर हमने इसका समरी चैप्टर की कवर करी, इस चैप्टर का क्या मैसेज है वो कवर किया, और इस चैप्टर के जो क्वेश्चन आंसर्स थे वो हमने कवर किए. स्टूडेंट्स, आप आगे चलकर हमसे कौन सी वीडियोस देखना चाहते हो, कौन से चैप्टर पर और कौन से सब्जेक्ट्स की वीडियोस देखना चाहते हो, हमें कमेंट कर ज़रूर बताएं. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर वॉचिंग. स्टूडेंट्स, अगर आपको ये वीडियो अच्छी लगे तो इसको लाइक ज़रूर करें और हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब भी ज़रूर करें. थैंक यू सो मच.